Hello everyone. I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today I am going to talk about how to research publishers. This is a topic that I've been seeing a lot of people asking about lately, not just here, but just on the internet in general. Whether it's Reddit or Facebook or Twitter, this just seems to be a very common question. First things first, Google is your friend. That is typically the biggest answer that I give whenever people ask me, how do I go about researching publishers? And typically they don't even present the question as, how do I research publishers? They just say, how do I get published? And of course, that is a loaded question because there are a long list of answers that go into answering that. But the question that these people really need to be asking is, how do I go about researching a publisher? Because typically once you have researched the publisher, the how do I submit to the publisher will be explained on their website. So that's all you have to do is go to their website and they will tell you exactly how to submit to them. And of course, the biggest thing is do exactly what they say. Do not do different crazy fonts. Do not try to submit your entire manuscript. Just follow directions is the easiest way to keep yourself out of the rejection bin. Before you can even get to that step, you have to research publishers. And I know this is a step that everyone hates doing because it's honestly the step that requires the most work out of everything in the publishing process. And of course, the publishing process, not the writing part of the process that comes before that, but the actual publishing process. Researching the actual publisher and deciding which one you want to submit to is probably the part that takes the most effort, which again is why most people hate doing it. How exactly do you go about that? Well, there isn't exactly like a magical website that's just like, here are all the publishers and spin the wheel. This is the one that's right for you. Just go submit to them. You have to go looking for yourself. And while there are awesome communities and forums, and even there are some websites that will give you lists of publishers, it's usually specifically, here are some of the top romance novel publishers. Here are some of the top sci-fi novel publishers, things like that. So usually they're very specific, and you have to take those lists with a grain of salt because there are going to be biases attached to why they created those particular lists. So it could be, these are the big publishing houses, like the big time New York Best Time Seller, big time publishers, which if you're a first time author, you're not going to want to submit to them because the chances of you getting your manuscript published by a big time publisher like that when it's your first book is about the same as winning the lottery. It's really, really hard. Most of the time, if you're not agent represented, a lot of them won't even let you submit to them. You have to submit to them through a literary agent. And then other ones, they just don't take you seriously if you don't have a literary agent. Or if you don't have a list of publications under your belt, they're not going to take you seriously. So there is that. I mean, you can, if they don't have the caveat of you have to go through a literary agent. If they do have submission guidelines on their website, you can submit to them. I'm just saying you're probably wasting your time that you could spend submitting to somewhere else. And this is not any sort of throwing shade on new authors. This is simply a fact. You can start all the way at the top if you want to, but your chances of getting in that VIP door are very slim. And it's a better strategy to spend your time submitting to smaller publishers first to get those publications onto your resume so that then you can start to woo some of the bigger publishing houses to be like, hey, I've already cleared the bar with these publications. You can take me more seriously than somebody who doesn't have anything on their resume, and go from there. But honestly, the easiest way to go about researching publishers if you don't have strong ties to a particular writing community or you're not deep into a writing forum that has those kind of resources that they can share with you, it's simply literally go to Google. Go to Google and ask for lists of publishers in whatever genre it is you're writing, whether it's romance or sci-fi or fantasy or whatever. Let's say I want to research publishers for fantasy novels. I would literally Google fantasy publishers, and Google will spit you out a whole bazillion pages of lists of publishers. Now, this is the part that's hard, is that you have to sift through all of this random information that Google is going to throw at you, because there are going to be scammers, there's going to be vanity presses, there's going to be defunct publishers, and then of course there's going to be finding whichever publishers are going to likely be the best fit for your level as an author and also for your story in particular. Because a lot of times people don't realize that publishers typically only publish specific things. They will have very specific lists of what kind of stories they're looking for. And it's not even as broad as we publish fantasy or we publish sci-fi. It's usually something very specific, like we only publish fantasy with this kind of subgenre to it, whether it's high fantasy, sword and sorcery, dark fantasy, whatever. And then also, these are the particular tropes that we're interested in. It gets that specific with most publishers. They don't just take whatever. Your story has to fit the mold for what they're looking for, because oftentimes how publishing houses work is their audiences are we want to read more of the same. So that means that they need to find stories that are more of the same. So obviously a publishing house that mainly publishes traditional sword and sorcery stories is not going to take your magical realism fantasy story set in a high school. That's just far and away from once upon a time in Fantasyland, Sir Lancelot went on a magic quest to go slay a dragon. Those are just, even though they're both fantasy, they are such different genres, and they oftentimes have such different audiences. And that's the breakdown of having to shop around and research publishers, is that you're going to come across that a lot, is that likely a lot of the publishers are just not going to be a good fit for your story. And there's no point in submitting your story to them, because they're going to see that it's the wrong genre, it's the wrong trope, and they're just going to throw it in the rejection bin. And you don't want that, because the thing is that this entire process takes a lot of time. Such a big rule, y'all. Please remember this, because it's a good way to burn bridges if you don't follow this rule. You are not supposed to do simultaneous submissions. What this means is you are not supposed to submit to like 5 publishers at the same time, the same story. It's just a rule in the publishing world of how this works, and publishers will get mad at you if they find out that you have submitted the same story to a bunch of the same places, and then they have to compete potentially with the other publishers. Like, let's say 2 of these 5 publishers you submitted to both want the story. Now you have to tell one of them, oh, actually, I also submitted this to this publishing house and I want to go with them instead of you. That's a really bad idea, because not only are you going to burn a bridge with that publisher that you're rejecting, but likely that publisher is going to talk to the publisher that you choose. And I have seen it happen before, where then the publisher that you choose is then going to turn around and be like, you know what? We don't want your story anymore, because publishers talk, y'all. So don't do that. It is a small world after all. In the publishing industry, people talk, they will find out. Do not do simultaneous submissions. It's just a bad idea. So because of that, you have to be very careful about where you want to submit in the first place, because it takes a long time. Oftentimes it can take anywhere from 6 months to a year to hear back from a publisher. It can take a very long time. Sometimes some of them are really awesome in that they will reject you really fast, like within a month or 3 months, but you can't count on that. There are a lot of publishers where you have to wait a lot longer to hear back from them, especially if you get a partial or a full request, because there are multiple hoops that you have to jump through. It isn't just, you just send them your manuscript and then they're like, oh, I love it, boom, contract. That's not how this process works. And I talk about that breakdown in several of my other videos of how the whole publishing process works. But what it boils down to is there's a lot of steps, a lot of hoops to jump through, and more often than not, you're going to get rejected. Even if you're the best author ever and it's the best story ever, you're still going to get rejected a lot. It's just part of the process. It's just how it works, especially because you have to think about it this way. Let's say a publishing house only has 5 slots open. So 5 books that they're going to publish in X amount of time, whether it's the next 6 months or next year, whatever, their next publishing period. If they have 500 people submit stories to them and they only have room for 5, that means that many rejections. It doesn't matter how good your story is, you're competing for only 5 slots with 499 other people and all of those stories. Keep that in mind. It's not necessarily about who has the best story, it's how many slots are available and what is the competition that you're up against. So again, you could be waiting a long time, go through a ton of hoops, get all the way to the end of the process of they request a full manuscript and still get rejected. And saving yourself a lot of that time and trouble to make sure that you are initially submitting to publishers that are the best fit for your story is going to make you more likely to make it all the way to the end step and get that contract. How do you do that? As I said, going to Google and searching for specific genres of publishers. The next step is with sorting through all of these different publishers, you need to check their website and see what other stuff do they publish. This is another step that a lot of people don't pay attention to and end up submitting to the wrong places, is look at the books that they are publishing. Look at the descriptions of the books. See what genre the books are. And again, not just, oh, this is fantasy, this is sci-fi. What are the specific genres? What are the specific tropes? What kinds of specific books are they publishing? What is their core audience that they are pandering to? If your book is one of these books is not like the other, you shouldn't be submitting to that publisher because they're going to reject you. Again, these publishers want more of the same. And of course, also looking at their website in terms of seeing what their submission process is. Some of them charge fees. Some of them require you to submit through a literary agent. Some of them have other requirements for whatever it is you need to do to submit your novel. And you need to make sure that you're willing to follow those directions, because I can guarantee you, if you don't follow directions, you are not getting published. The end. As well as you also want to see how successful the authors are that they published. Now, I say that with an asterisk next to the word successful because most authors, we do this as secondary income. It's very hard as an author to make 100% of your living from your books. When I say successful, I mean that this particular publisher, when they publish these authors' books, are selling a lot of the books, that they're actually doing their job as a publisher and properly marketing these authors, getting their books into the hands of readers and making sales. Because at the end of the day, that is the publisher's job. It is their job to put together your book and print it and get it into readers' hands. Now, as I've said in my other videos, you as the author are also responsible for doing that too. You also need to market yourself and get your books into your readers' hands, but a publisher is supposed to do a lot of the heavy lifting for that. And if it's clear that they're not, you don't want to submit to them. So if they only have like 4 followers on Instagram, if their Twitter has been dormant for like 5 years, if they have no online presence, if you can see on Amazon they have basically no sales, that's not a publisher that you want to sign with, because they're not going to do anything to actually help get your book out there, which is literally all that they're there to do. So keep that in mind too, to make sure that the publisher is a good fit for you just as much as your book is a good fit for the publisher. And along those same lines, you want to see, when was the last book that they published? How long do they go between publishing periods? So obviously, if a publisher hasn't published a new book in the past like 5 years, you don't want to publish with them, because chances are they could be a defunct publishing company, or it could be that they just don't take on very many books, and that means that likely you're not going to get published, but also that means that their budget for being able to market your book is likely very, very small, which is why they go through such long periods of time before taking on new books, because each book is an investment for a publisher. There's upfront labor and cost that goes into making your book into a book and marketing it, and if they don't have a lot of capability for that labor and that cost, that means your book is probably not going to do very well, and again, you don't want to be published through them. So make sure that they do have recent publications available on their website. It's also a really good idea to get involved with your local writing community, or if you're not able to do that, or you don't live somewhere where there are local writing communities, get on forums on the internet with writing communities and seek out conventions where there is a heavy presence of the writing community, authors, publishers, editors, all that. You need to ingratiate yourself into these industry communities because you're also going to be able to better research publishers through this by talking to people who are in the game, whether they're authors that can tell you, hey, this publisher is really great, this publisher you want to stay away from, or even being able to talk to the publishers themselves and seeing if they might be a good fit. And on top of it, if you meet publishers in person, you can cut through a lot of that red tape in the submission process. So it's definitely worth it to network. You want to go through as many avenues as possible in the researching process in order to determine which publisher is right for you. Now, I have seen a lot of people talking about like vanity press, self-publishing, and hybrid, and all of the similarities and differences between these things and how that's different from being traditionally published. Is it easier? Is it harder? And all of that. First and foremost, vanity presses are a scam. Any publisher that requires you to pay them to publish your book is a scam. The end. Putting that out there. It's a well-known fact in the publishing industry. It's just a do not do. It looks very unprofessional. And quite frankly, it degrades your book because that tells future publishers, because they see the names of your previously published works and what they were published under, it makes them then think that you have to essentially pay people in order to make your book into a book and that your book isn't good enough to be published, regardless of the actual quality of the book itself. It's just kind of like a black mark on your publishing record and will make it really hard for you to get other books published the traditional route. So that's really important to keep in mind, as well as don't waste your money on that nonsense. There's just so many other avenues where you can achieve the same thing without having to shell out to literally make your book exist. I can't speak on the hybrid process because it's not a process that I've done, and honestly, it's not a process I'm ever going to do. I personally don't have great things to say about it based on the things that I have heard about and seen. However, I will let y'all discuss that in the comments if that is something that you have taken that route or you have opinions on it. Feel free to share in the comments. But my personal advice is that I would steer clear of any sort of hybrid situation going on. Self-publishing is different these days from what is seen as the traditional vanity publishing, in that self-publishing through things like Amazon CreateSpace and Ingram Spark and various other self-publishing platforms is that you are taking on the cost and the labor of the publishing company. So you have to do everything yourself, meaning that you have to hire your own editor. You have to pay for your own IBN codes. You have to pay for your own cover art. You have to do 100% of the marketing. You have to do your own layout. All of that is stuff that the traditional publisher will handle for you. And if you're doing self-publishing, that means you have to do it all yourself. And that's why self-publishing is different from vanity press, because with self-publishing, you're just removing the middleman and doing everything yourself, whereas a vanity press is you're paying a publisher to do all the work for you, but instead of going through the entire process of submission and review and all of that goes with a traditional publisher, it's kind of like cutting the line and all that because you have money that you can just throw at it is the main difference, and is also why it's so frowned upon in the industry. This video is about going the traditional publishing route and how exactly to get there, to get to the submission process. The last piece of advice that I have is absolutely get Query Tracker. This is great for both submitting to publishers as well as submitting to literary agents. It is an awesome tool that allows you to actually see your submissions in real time. So it allows you to see that, oh, they're currently looking over my manuscript. Oh, they've currently passed it on to the next step. You can see all of this in real time. It gives you updates. It's really, really awesome. As well as you can also use it to be able to look at, hey, I'm considering this publisher. What experience do people have on Query Tracker with this particular publisher? It can give give you any information such as it's a defunct publisher, it's a scam, all the way up to an average of how long you can expect the process to take. Oh, this particular publisher usually responds to submissions within 3 months. This particular publisher usually responds within 6 months. This one takes a year. This one takes over a year. All of this sort of information is really valuable in figuring out where you want to submit to. Because if you're like me, where you have multiple manuscripts in different stages of process, it's not that big of a deal that if a publisher is a publisher that is really important for you to submit to, it's someone that you think is a really good fit for your book, as well as there's prestige or insert whatever caveats here attached to that particular publisher, but they're one of the ones where they usually takes a year to respond. That might not be such a big problem if you have other books you're working on and potentially going to either submit to other publishers or self-publish. You can take that risk of having that long wait period because you have other stuff going on. So you can still get other things out there in the interim. However, if this is your first book, or if you're the type of person where you can only work on one book at a time, submitting to a publisher that usually takes over a year to get back to you is probably not the best idea. So making sure that you keep all these things in mind. Make sure it's not a defunct publisher. Make sure that they're publishing things on a regular basis. Make sure they're doing a good job of actually marketing and selling the existing books they have in their wheelhouse. Making sure the publisher is actually a good fit for the book. And lastly, making sure that you understand the waiting period that you're going to have to wait before you hear back from the publisher. Those are the top 5 most important things that you need to know before ever hitting submit on that email to submit to that publisher. I hope you all have found this video to be helpful. If you did, please be sure to give it a like. And if you're new, subscribe. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.